Was that a song by Chicago? Does anybody know what time it is? Does anybody care? Is anybody listening? I don't know. Here's a thought. Kata, Pumse, Yong, Paulo, Kyun forms. Probably the biggest departure between the American and European and modern interpretation of martial arts and the classical one. I was lucky. I was really lucky because as a kid, starting off on all this, I really wanted to to learn the mysteries of karate and kung fu. Later, when I discovered the magazines, that there were these other styles out there, and um, I wanted that magical ability, to do a small little chop or something and completely devastate a larger opponent, and the ability to drop someone with one kick or sweep someone and pin them even though they were stronger, taller. I mean, that's a natural fantasy if you get into martial arts, right? But I was lucky. I was learning forms, and when I saw people spar and compete and spar in class, very little of what was in the forms was being used. And this was Shotokan, so we didn't spend a whole hell of a lot of time going over self-defense techniques like grabs and holds. I mean, it was something that occasionally popped up. It was about as rare and infrequent, especially for a kids class, to work on self-defense as it is for a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school these days to work on, having someone glove up and throw punches at you. It might happen now and then. Some schools might do it more, but it just really isn't a thing. Most schools doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu are all sport, or cross-trained for MMA. And Shotokan and Karate Do, they're about self-improvement and exercise and a number of cultural things. They're not super, super concerned with street combat effectiveness, right? But then you have these pesky forms, there's so much time and energy put into learning the forms. And when you're told, that a punch is racing at you and you're going to block it this way, it's physically impossible to make that work against the kinds of punches that people were punching me in the face with in New Jersey, right? And certainly physically impossible to make this type of block work or this type of block to a punch to the face work against the skilled fighters that lived in Hamilton and Trenton, New Jersey, people that boxed at the Trenton Pal, right? It just wasn't going to happen. And I ran into some magazine articles in Black Belt and Inside Kung Fu, and this was just when the whole idea of bunkai and hidden applications was starting to go mainstream. Maybe just a little bit before, you have Dillman and the like, Seiyu Oyata, that they had kind of yet to hit the exposure that they would later. But anyway, I read the magazine article, and one day, just out of nowhere, we were doing one-step exercises, and there was an adult in the class, a green belt, who was in his 20s and maybe older. He was old enough to develop male pattern baldness, and he was solidly built. He certainly wasn't a small 11, 12-year-old kid like I was. And the teacher, after we did some one-step sparring, said, okay, now, he's going to throw the punch, and the person defending, you can do different techniques. Unscripted. I was like, yeah. So I tried this technique. I made a video about it, and I wound up, I think, injuring his arm, slamming him face first on the ground, and he got up and walked out of class, and I never saw him again in the dojo. Maybe we just didn't intersect, but it made an impression on me. Later, in high school, I got into a fight where someone tried to first kick me in the groin and then punch me in the temple, and I avoided the techniques and came back with a shuto to the solar plexus, and he didn't drop. He stopped. He stopped moving and he stopped breathing. And I was like, wow, I actually kind of did the Heimlich maneuver and got the air pumping in his lungs because I was afraid he was going to die. Right? And these are all techniques from the kata. And so, I know that something's in there. And I believe that most this idea of what we call blocking techniques being blocks, and a lot of the bizarre and unworkable applications that some people were taught as applications, maybe purposely mistaught, maybe the teachers themselves didn't know. Probably the main reason why many modern American karate styles started and kung fu styles started, and why they're like, let's just do away with forms, like Bruce Lee advocated, right? Um, and I think that's not because forms are bad, but I think it's because forms are encyclopedias, and martial artists who were using them were taught to use them for weightlifting, for cardio and conditioning, when really the forms are the encyclopedia of a system, and it's written in a language where every word can have 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 meanings, depending on context, right? And they were taught that way because if you practice martial arts, you could be punished or your family. B, if you were caught with books and materials about it, you could be punished. And by punished, I mean possibly having an arm lopped off or killed, right? And also, sometimes, probably more often than not, many of your students were illiterate. This is before universal education became a thing in most places, right? So you have these encyclopedias of motion, of technique, of theory, of application. And in the modern era, and maybe a long part of the classical era, people were using them either as resistance, as weightlifting material, or maybe tossing them back and forth like beach balls, while running back and forth to get cardio. So, to me, my mission in life, once I discovered that there was this hidden information, was, you know what? Let me crack open the encyclopedia, learn the language, read it, and decipher it. Just the thought I wanted to share with whoever's out there listening.